Hello, this is Carrie Fell. Welcome to my studio.
Okay, I think I might be crazy. I have these sets of warp chains that I've dyed. They're all 15 yards long, but they're just a random number of ends. And they weren't meant to be woven together because their colorways are so crazily different. But I need 626 ends to tie onto this warp I have on the loom for blankets. And I'm starting to run out of this wool. I'd like to use the same wool for warp and weft, and that stuff here on the end isn't even that type of wool. It's just basically here. So if I want to make blankets, I have to use these colorful warps that I have. And yeah, I'm thinking of just making a crazy stash busting set of blankets. Crossing my fingers and jumping. The colors I have for weft are very neutral, so I think that'll work. And if I use up these, I can use some of these other colors for weft as well. This is also very compatible with Harrisville. I can even dye to get the color that I want. So at this point, I've taken all my warp chains and put them through the leaf sticks. So there's the loop that has preserved my cross, and then I use that to know how to lay it into the leaf sticks. I'm going to cut the ends and thread it through. What I've done is I have just randomly created stripes, and just tied on to what's there. So I just tied a bunch of the purples on there and used the whole chain. Then I had these warm colors, and I tied on a little narrow stripe here and the rest here. Now I'm going to tie on the red. There's not very much of it. It'll just be one stripe right about here. And then I've got to wind some more chains to fill in all the gaps to tie on here. And I'm just going to take some of these neutral colors here and fill in that while leaving some of them for weft as well. And it's just going to be crazy. Now this might look a little horrific, but it's not an issue at all. It's just not under tension right now. And when you're designing in the reed like this is what happens. Lots of crossed threads as you pick some from here and there. But once this is under tension, it'll be easy to yank and crank and wind onto the back beam. The reed sorts everything out. So not an issue at all.
Here's another warp for the blankets. You can see how I dyed this one up in my Playing with Primaries video, and I'll have a link to that in the iCard above.
All right, the crazy stash busting blanket warp is looking crazy, and the parts that are still looped are waiting for warps to be tied on. And I've used up all the chains that I had hanging on my wall. That would be here. So I used up all the chains of Forsell that were 15 yards long. So these are all shorter warps or other fibers or whatever. Also waiting to be put on looms. But so what I did was I calculated how many ends. I know how many ends of each of these colors are on the loom right now. And I know how many ends are on the previous project. So those loops there all add up to 218 ends. So I went to my shelf, which is back here, and this is the yarn that I'm using for the, not those ones, these ones here, and not this one. This is what's left of the Forsell. I'm going to save these for weft right now. These are color mink, which is a brown, and then there's one cone of olive in the back. And I'm not sure how much of a cone makes a blanket, but I have enough warp on there to make at least 6 blankets, so that's not going to be enough weft, I'm pretty sure, for 6 blankets, but who knows. Anyway, so I'm not going to use any of this for warp. I still have one cone of, oh, this bright green. This is, yeah, bright green Forsell. So I'm winding it right now. Don't know if there'll be 216 ends, but whatever it is, it is. And I'm winding 15 yards here, and I'm going to throw that in the dye pot. I'm not going to leave it as is, it's too bright. And yeah, we're going to over dye it with probably some dark blues and not make it a solid. Maybe do some more resist, like the previous blanket here had some resist where I put zip ties before putting it into a black dye pot. And so these green areas are peeking through. And so I think I'm going to do that here too, but not with black, maybe with blue. So this is the latest warp that I dyed up, and I have a video of the making of this warp. It's more of the Forsell. It was the gray color. I overdyed it with wine rose and gold, and the gold came out a little bit greenish. And then I grabbed some chestnut dye powder, and I mixed it with citric acid, and I speckled it over the top while it was still hot, and just let the sprinkles settle in where they are, and then I steamed it. And so what I got were these really cool speckles that you can see when it's lifted up close, and the chestnut, which is a brownish color, actually splits into blue and rust and pink, and so the speckles create another interesting nuance to this yarn. So let's put this yarn on the loom right now. Okay, I thought I was recording and I wasn't. So what I did is I removed the loops that were holding the cross, and I just pulled out my lee sticks. And the lee sticks have done their job. They were keeping the cross, and that was keeping the threads in order. Now that they're tied on, and we've already got the old warp going through the reed and the heddles, that will keep everything in order, so the lee sticks aren't needed anymore. So they are in the corner now. And we have multiple warps here, crisscrossing and tied on. And I'm curious to see what the whole thing looks like now. So I'm just going to, I'll raise your angle a bit here. So that's about as high as I can get. So we've got everything sitting in a tub, big tub full of warp chains that are sitting on the floor in front of the loom. Get back in here. I'm just going to gently get these knots through the reed. So I'm going to pull it tight on the back beam, and then we'll get an idea of what this warp is going to look like. These strings were just holding the back warp rod up so that the weight of the rod didn't pull through and pull my ends through before I had a chance to tie them on. They're all tied on nicely now. Sometimes I might find one that I haven't tied on, and that's no big deal. If it comes off through the heddles, I'll just pick it up, put it back through the heddles, tie it on. Not a big deal. So that's as far as I'm going to go with that. Woohoo! Look at the colors! And of course the colors will change down the length of the warp. So I'm going to put 15 yards on with my yank and crank method. I'll have to ease it through the heddles, all these knots. But once that's on, then I can start with the yanking and the cranking. Just easing the knots through. There we go. Look at that beautiful color combination. No planning or figuring out ahead of time. I just winged it. I'll be winging the weft as well. Give it a good yank. Pull it tight on the back beam. I brace the loom by putting my knee on the bench, which pushes against the loom. So I actually give these a good yank when I'm, make sure it's tight around that back beam. And then wind it a few revolutions. Some of these are slightly sticky from the dyeing process. So that's the resistance I'm getting. The threads are in order, so that's not a problem. It's just the reed is combing out the stickiness. That's one of the benefits of warping front to back with hand-dyed yarn, is the reed will comb it out on its way through. Oh, I like some of the colors that are happening. It's different from 2 winds ago. Pretty tightly. The loom actually tips up off the ground a bit. So I'm just going to keep doing this. Yank and crank until it's all on the back beam. Here's a view from the back. In the middle of the winding on process, I have a big roll of corrugated cardboard on the floor, which is being rolled up, separating every layer. And another view after a few more cranks. Colors being quite different. Oh, this is so fun. So here's blanket number 2. I'm using black Harrisville Shetland for the weft, and it feels very fine, but Shetland plumps up really nicely in the wet finishing. It really transforms, so it's going to be awesome. So this is a slightly different treadling pattern. This is the 3rd one in the Davison book. Just a diamond sort of bird's eye. And I'm finding that this dark color works really well with the olive and then the blues. Loving this one. And here's the 3rd blanket. It's using an olive colored 4-ply yarn, and it's pattern number 5 from the Davison book. And so far so good. What a fun project this is. So this is the 4th blanket. And it's woven in the pattern number 5 from Davison's book. And so there's a fair amount of plain weave. So 3 rows of plain weave intermixed with the twill. So that gives an interesting pattern. It's woven in this Forsell wool. It's 97% wool, 3% viscose, and the viscose would be those little neps you see in there. I've worked with this before, dyeing and weaving, and I found that it fluffs up very nicely. So it's looking very fine here on the bobbin, and sort of thin in the warp here. But I know in the wet finishing it will plump up and be really cool. So this one is going to be a lot lighter than the other blankets. I kind of like it actually. I'm on blanket number 5 and using the color mink again. And this is pattern number 4 in the Davison book. And this weft looks great with pretty much all the warp. Love this end especially. I'm near the end of my warp. Those are the knots right there. So there wasn't quite enough to make a blanket. So I'm making some yardage. And I'm just using up whatever wool that's the right weight that I can find in my stash. Wool that isn't enough to make a complete thing. So I have some of it piled right here, and I'm just winding off what I need, winding off some bobbins and weaving it, and we'll see how much yardage I can get out of this. I think this will make some fun, crazy hats. Not Viking hats, maybe faux Viking hats. Fantasy Viking hats. That's probably what I'll do with it. A pile of 6 blankets, which I will now work on and finish the fringes. So I'm going to do a twisted fringe on all of them. So that's a lot of work. I think lots of Netflix will be happening over the next few days. And once all the fringes are twisted and secured, then the whole pile goes into the wash. I haven't decided quite yet whether I'm going to throw them in the washing machine or do them by hand. I don't have a top-loading washing machine, which would be the perfect thing for these. So I may end up doing them in my bathtub and stomping on them with my feet for agitation. We'll see. So here's my first finished blanket, already tagged and in my store. And I've got the other ones in various stages. Some of them are waiting to be wet finished, some of them are washed and waiting to be pressed, and some of them are still having the fringes twisted. So rather than wait until all of them were done and showing you them all, that could be weeks as I work on them piece by piece, because I'm already weaving multiple other projects and dyeing other projects. So I'm going to show you the one that's finished, and then the others will be on my store, and you'll be able to take a look at them and how they turned out as well.
So this ended up having a beautiful drape. It's thicker than I would use for a scarf, which is just great because it's a blanket. And this is the one that has the twill pattern and in sort of a taupe weft. So it sort of warmed up the whole blanket. It ended up being, lap-sized, cuddle on the couch in front of the TV size. So, it's not a big bed blanket, and I knew that from the start because the size of my loom limited me to, 45 inches is the weaving size of my loom. I actually wove this about 40 inches, and it shrunk down to, let me get out the tape measure. So it shrunk down to 36 inches wide and 58 inches long. So, cozy, warm, 100% wool, hand-dyed blanket. Each of the blankets are going to look a little bit different. The ones with the black weft will deepen the color, and the ones with the light weft will lighten up the whole thing. But no matter which weft I use, it ties all the colors together nicely and makes them work, even though the stripes are so very different, and I wouldn't think that they would normally work together. By having a weft that covers all of them, it sort of ties all the colors together, and I think it works. Thank you so much to my patrons whose financial support helps me to keep creating videos like this. Also, a big help is just clicking like and subscribe. I have links below for my store and my website. Thank you for watching.